Hi everyone, my name is Joanna, and today I wanted to do a video on the topic of being empathic. I recently wrote a blog entitled Are You Empathic? And I will include a link below in the comment section of this video. And in that blog I talked about common traits and signs of being an empath. And so you can check that out if that's something you're curious about. But the focus of this video is just really the experience and sometimes the struggle of being an empath. As a therapist, my work has really shifted over the recent years. I've had a huge influx of really intuitive folks from all ranges. I work with kids all the way up to adults. And so I've had and noted that I would say most of the people that I see right now are actually intuitive. All varying degrees of being intuitive. Some really connected, some connecting, some starting to open to that whole concept. And the reason I wanted to do this video was I have a lot of empaths that tend to come in and they actually do not necessarily recognize that they are empathic. Many, especially adults, but even the children, really have an inherent sense that they are different. But generally what I see is that they have already internalized that that difference is negative. They see their sensitivity as a really negative thing. They feel different. They notice that they respond and just kind of interact with people and environments really differently. And so when they cross my path, I find that they've already really internalized a very negative narrative about their emotionality. Some due to teasing, bullying, or just kind of never learning the skills to manage their emotionality, shut down from all emotionality. They really disconnect, and I find that can attribute that can really generate a lot of sense of sadness. Like intuitives are just, they're connected to light. Empaths are really meant to be connected. So when they disconnect from others, but especially from themselves, it really leaves them void. And they can feel the deficit. They can feel what they label as usually depression and fatigue. That can arise also from other people draining them, but for the most part, if they've had really brutal or overwhelming experiences, there's a tendency for them to really kind of hide out in their head, as I call it, and disconnect from their emotional experiences. And this mutes the negative, but it also mutes kind of the joy and the positive of life. And so they just kind of operate at a lower level. And it doesn't feel right for them. They intuitively understand that that's not functioning for them, but they don't know what else to do. So being empathic is a gift, but it's a gift with responsibility. A lot of empaths sometimes feel like it's a curse. Empaths feel a lot. They feel intensely, and they can feel full range of emotion. So they can be really excited, really joyful, maybe even what some people would call hyper in their positivity, and they can feel really sad, and they can feel really low and really fatigued, and they can really fluctuate a lot in a single day, and so that can be really difficult. And I see that in empathic children where they just struggle. They feel a lot, and of course with their brains and where they are developmentally, they're just still even learning how to manage day-to-day stuff. And so when they have this really expansive and intensive range of emotionality, they don't know what to do with that. And the struggle I find is that a lot of people are overwhelmed by strong emotionality, even if it's positive, but certainly if it's negative. And so when a child or even when an adult experiences a really strong emotionality, a lot of people feel stressed by that, the listener. and they will make comments, though usually their intent is to help, that really shuts down communication about what a person is emotionally experiencing. They'll minimize, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. They might try to problem solve, like, oh, you just need to do this, and everything will be fine. They might make platitudes, comments like, oh, it's all meant to be. Nothing that really helps usually someone in a really intensive emotional state. And so a person who's feeling that big emotion can feel really stuck and feel really alone in those experiences, and that can be kind of traumatic. It can make them feel really isolated, like they're different and people don't understand them. And sometimes the narrative is the empath is told to stop being so sensitive. Now, I'm not inviting and encouraging or saying that people should be emotionally vomiting everywhere. What I'm saying is this: the empath feels a lot. An empath, being empathic is not the same as being empathetic. Empathetic is about the ability to really kind of place yourself in another person's shoes, and see it from their standpoint, and have a really strong sense of what a person is experiencing. An empath actually experiences another person's emotionality, and it can actually include their physicality. So empaths absorb other people's energy. This can come through just knowing and sensing people's feelings. They can sometimes sense or intuit like thoughts or intent of a person. And sometimes they can actually feel another person's pain, like physical pain, and they do it and they can recognize it because it actually occurs in their body. So if all of a sudden an empath is having a good day and they cross paths with someone who's feeling really sad, they might notice the sadness and they have no idea where it came from, because it really didn't originate from their own experience. It came from outside of them. Empaths can actually tune into the energies of places. So some empaths might have a really negative response to like a certain venue, a certain place, like they just don't feel safe there. They sense that something really negative is just like some sort of negative imprint is there. So they can have a lot of emotional responses and not even themselves understand why. And these responses can be even more confusing to the people around them. And so it can create a dynamic where empaths really start to feel like something's wrong with them because they notice that they're just different. And what I really wanted to just kind of take some time to do is, one, validate, I think, the struggle of what it's like to feel the emotionality of other people. I think it's difficult enough for us to just be responsible and manage our own stuff, but when someone has the capacity to actually take on another person's burden, like that's a heavy load to carry, and that can be really overloading. And that isn't necessarily the purpose of being an empath. It isn't about having to take on and free people of their emotional experiences. Most empaths have a huge desire to be of help. And sometimes that can go to the extent of sacrificing themselves and their own well-being to be of service to others. And that, it too, is not necessarily what our role is in being empathic. So some of the suggestions I have is, if you feel like you are empathic, if you already have that idea and recognition that that's how you're built, if you notice or have suspicions you're different, feel free to check out the blog to see if maybe those patterning and traits resonate with you. Then what I invite you to really look at is ways to create balance. I think what I usually recommend, and what I really start with in the work that I do with empaths that come into the healing work that I do, is to really look at what brings them joy, how much room is there in their life for joy, what are the energy drains around them, what's their understanding of themselves, what's their perception of emotionality, because many have a very negative perception of emotion, especially negative emotion. What's been their experience with emotionality, as far as what was their upbringing like? What are the people who are closest to them? How do they respond to them, and what do they say to them when they're in these emotional states? And most definitely, what's their self-care level? Because these are really critical elements for an empath. It's really important for empaths to have an understanding of how they are. Many empaths have intuitive abilities beyond just sensing other people's emotions. But as I said, many empaths don't even recognize that they are empathic, because the reading of people comes in like all other sensory information, and so there isn't always an awareness that other people don't pick up on this, that they don't receive this info, which is called clairsentience, which is the ability to actually sense and feel the emotionality of other people. Because it happens in an empath's body, they tend to mistake it for their own, and they can have a really hard time separating out what's their experience and what's another person's, or maintaining their own emotional presence while someone else is in a different state, in a different emotional state. So if an empath is happy, it's very difficult for them to remain happy unless they have very strong boundaries already done, and stay happy when they're interfacing with someone who's like in a really cranky mood or irritable or sad or what have you. So they tend to be very impacted by that. It's a really hard thing for them to understand and learn how to set up those walls, because those walls actually seem really counterintuitive. Empaths are, again, they're meant to be connected, so it's their natural tendency to want to heal, want to be of service, to help people shift into a state of positivity. So placing boundaries actually sometimes feels wrong. It feels mean to them. And there's a tendency of empaths to be really too tolerant of negative. They're very forgiving, which is very valuable. They're very loving, which is very valuable. But it's a fine line between tolerating a mistake and tolerating a pattern of negative behaviors. And so it can be difficult to sometimes discern that. And usually that understanding emerges from a lot of negative experiences. So it's not uncommon to find an empath has had a really long history of painful experiences with other people and feeling taken advantage of, feeling exploited, feeling like there's no one in their own world to kind of support and give them love, because essentially they've created a dynamic of giving. Most of the people around an empath might actually be people seeking another person's help or energy versus being in the capacity to be of service. So it can be a lonely place, but it is something that an empath can learn to navigate, and to learn how to manage to kind of wade through. I call it surfing the waves of emotion that are just going to roll through. The emotions experienced are not a negative thing. They're unpleasant at times, they're intense at times, but resistance around them usually creates a worse dynamic. So I do a lot of coaching, and I encourage empaths to really learn how to self-soothe. Learn and honor your ways of protecting yourself, of recharging. Whether it's dedicating and committing to yourself that you're going to spend time in nature, or having downtime, even if it raises eyebrows or people accuse you of being a hermit, or frustrates people because they wish you were more active or more outside your house, and you're just needing time to just kind of be on your own to refuel. Honoring any sort of sensory needs or any elements of nature that just seem to ground you. So empaths tend to really resonate with nature, whether they just like to be outside, or if they're indoors, they might have like potted plants, maybe they have pets. At work, I always encourage to bring nature to their desk. It can be a healing and a grounding element there. So it could be, making sure there's sunlight if you have a window, having potted plants, having rocks, crystals, it doesn't matter. Anything that just makes you feel better is self-soothe. And we are all different, so different things resonate with different people, and that's just fine. I've really taken note to encourage, if I'm working with an adult empath, to look at what they used to do instinctively as children. Many empaths as children just naturally balance themselves through activity and play, and just intuitively move towards the things that give them joy. So it's not uncommon for empaths to have a knowledge or memories or even a lot of stories about collecting rocks and seashells and sitting in trees and playing with animals and moving and just sort of being these sensory beings, especially in nature. So use those little awarenesses to take care of you. Your goal is to try to create a state of balance. And you have influence over things like self-care. You're able sometimes to limit your interactions with negative environments or negative people. And when you can't, learning to boundary set, learning how to recognize what is your experience and letting go of what is not yours, learning to let go of relationships that aren't serving you, learning the difference between helping and rescuing, and just self-healing techniques to just keep yourself in balance as you navigate life and do your offerings, and maintaining the mindset that self-care is not selfishness. That tends to get confused a lot as well. So as I said, these are sort of the struggles that I see a lot of empaths go through, and some focal points that people can kind of start to reflect on, journal about, take remembrance on, as far as what maybe if you were a child, what you used to do, and start just experimenting. See what makes you feel content. See what brings relief. See what helps you feel centered. Because when you are balanced, spiritually, physically, emotionally, you'll feel it. You'll take note. The worry loops won't be going on. The fear is going to settle and be quiet. The angst is probably going to be really quiet. You're just going to feel in a really calm, contented place. And you can feel that more often. It is natural to feel negative emotions. They serve a purpose. So, I would never encourage or state that it's ever doable, that you're never going to feel negative. But you might be able to limit the time you spend in that negative space by learning how to pivot out of it, which I've talked about in some of my prior videos. And learning how to rein in sort of the negative self-talk, and really prioritizing learning how you take care of you, how you settle your body down, how you can clear and clean and shift your energy so that your physical presence and your emotional being feels good, feels happy, feels well. So I thank you for your time. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to comment below. Otherwise, I am wishing you the greatest of days. Bye.